Hi and welcome to a British Audiophile. For those of you who don't know me already, my name is Taryn. Elac have been a little bit busy of late. They just launched their Unify reference series of speakers. That's down to designer Andrew Jones in America. There's also another range of speakers that they recently introduced, the Solanos, and that hails from Elac's mothership in Germany. They're designed by Rolf Yankee. Now apologies Rolf if that isn't the correct pronunciation of your surname. The Solanos sit above the Unify reference series of speakers. In fact, they're sandwiched between the Carinas and the Velas, the Navis being an active design. Rolf Yankee is not only responsible for the design of the Solanos, the Velas, but also the range-topping Concentros as well. All the passive speakers from the Carinas and above, and that includes the Solano range of speakers, feature Elac's highly regarded air motion transformer. That's a folded ribbon tweeter. I'll get into the details of how that works later. But let's get back to the Solanos. There's a center channel, a bookshelf speaker and a floor standing speaker, the FS287s that you can see behind me. That's what I'll be reviewing. It retails here in the UK for £2,699. Let's see if it's any good. The Elac Solano FS287 is a 2.5-way bass reflex speaker available in gloss black and gloss white. It retails for £2,699 here in the UK, as I mentioned earlier, measuring 985 by 260 by 300 millimeters and weighing in at 19 kilograms. That's approximately 39 by 10 by 12 inches and 42 pounds. It's an elegant looking speaker by virtue of its slim profile, curved edges and premium gloss finish. The front baffle houses two 150mm or 6-inch mid-woofers of paper cone construction combined with an anodized aluminium membrane. Instead of a conventional dome tweeter, we have Elac's Jet 5 air motion transformer. This folded ribbon tweeter is capable of extending up to a remarkable 50,000 Hz and features on Elac's higher range of products. The aluminium plinth at the bottom suspends and conceals a downward firing port, and you can improve stability by fitting the supplied outrigger feet. The rear of the FS287 reveals that this speaker has a second port. There's also two pairs of speaker terminals for those of you who are interested in bi-wiring, but more advisedly for those of you who are interested in bi-amping. The Elac Solano FS287 is a 2.5-way design. The tweeter extends down to 2,400 Hz before handing to the first of the mid-woofers. That crossover point is relatively high for a speaker of this size, but I'll get to that later. The first of those mid-woofers then extends all the way down to a claimed 30 Hz, but it's supported in the lower frequencies by the second woofer, which extends from 450 Hz and below down to 30 Hz as well. And that's what makes this a 2.5-way design. What I really want to focus on in this segment is talking about the air motion transformer, Elac's well-regarded Jet 5 tweeter. In a conventional dome tweeter where the diaphragm is typically made out of fabric or some form of metal, the voice coil is wound around the edge of the diaphragm. At very high frequencies, you're asking that diaphragm to move in and out very quickly. The moving mass of the diaphragm, its damping and its stiffness all become very critical. It's very difficult to get a good blend of all of those characteristics, and if you don't, it will lead to significant levels of distortion. Over the years, manufacturers have tried all kinds of workarounds, from fancy suspension systems, cooling systems, and so on. One of the solutions is an air motion transformer. It has a very thin membrane with an aluminium trace running in one direction and then the other all the way across the membrane, and the folds in the ribbon coincide with the changes in direction of the aluminium trace. Due to Faraday's laws of electromagnetic induction, when an electric current passes through the aluminium trace and it's placed in the vicinity of a magnetic field from a permanent magnet, it behaves like an accordion, effectively pumping air in and out of it, as opposed to the pistonic motion from a conventional driver. The benefit of an AMT diaphragm is that it's very light and it's very fast, and that's why the Jet 5 can extend all the way to 50,000 Hz. Now you don't need 50,000 Hz, it just means that it can do 20,000 Hz in its sleep with very little distortion. There are some drawbacks to AMT drivers though. One is that they're very fragile, so you have to be very careful if you're cleaning them or you've got little fingers around. Normally there is some kind of metal protection on the front. Another issue is that they don't extend down particularly low, and that's why the crossover point is at 2400 Hz. I'd have thought with a conventional dome tweeter it'd have been somewhere around 1800 to 2000 Hz, and that places more demand on the mid-woofer and can lead to added distortion in that particular driver. The final issue is that they have a different dispersion pattern to a conventional dome tweeter. Typically, they're quite wide dispersion in the horizontal plane and very narrow dispersion in the vertical plane. And that isn't a drawback in itself, it just means that it needs very careful design to get the dispersion to match from the tweeter to the mid-woofer, which is likely to be a conventional driver. The Elac Solano FS287s are a warm sounding speaker with a prominent bass. Let's delve in. It's clear that they've tuned these speakers for bass weight and bass extension, but not necessarily to be the last word in bass speed. Officially they dig down to 30 Hz, although it's not specified whether that's the -6 dB point. I'm assuming that it is. Regardless, with room gain, most people are going to get all the bass extension that they desire. I was watching and listening to movies and I had to go and double check that the subwoofer wasn't turned on. The FS287s are certainly capable of accessing the LFE information that's prominent on movie tracks. I'm not saying that a subwoofer wouldn't be beneficial, it's just that you don't normally expect a compact four-standing speaker of this size to dig down quite so deep. With music listening, they're not the last word in neutrality and articulation when it comes to the bass. I have an excellent recording in 192 24-bit resolution of Bob Marley's Exodus, and that track has excellent bass. The definition and the texture in the bass wasn't quite there with the FS287s. It's the mid-range of the FS287s that gives this speaker its warm, rich and smooth tonality, and that's because the lower mid-range is slightly more emphasis and the upper mid-range is a little bit more recessed. With some of my favourite blues singers, people like Carrie Bell and Muddy Waters, it added a little bit more thickness to the vocal than I would like. But this speaker will appeal to those of you who want a speaker to relax and listen to for long periods of time without any listening fatigue. It won't appeal to those of you who want a bit more excitement, whether you play brass instruments or strings, especially things like electric guitars. They lose a little bit of that presence and sharpness that they should naturally have. The overall soundstage is more than reasonable, way beyond the speakers left and right, and there's a degree of soundstage depth there as well, but the imaging, the ability to place instruments within the soundstage and the separation between the instruments isn't quite as good as the best speakers I've heard for £2,000 or £3,000. And that's because that mid-bass woofer doesn't stop and start quite as quickly as some of those other designs, and that robs this speaker of a little bit of clarity, and that means that the leading edges of notes are slightly softened and the decay structures are slightly obscured. The high frequencies have great refinement and there's decent top-end extension. There's never a hint of brightness, aggression or over-sibilant behaviour. You get a sense of what that Jet 5 tweeter is capable of, and there's good integration between the tweeter and the mid-woofer. The tweeter certainly doesn't draw attention to itself. If anything, I'd have liked a little bit more emphasis on top to give it a little bit more of that airy, ethereal quality. But that isn't the tweeter that's at fault. I think it's the overall tonal balance which is drawn more towards the lower frequencies. So you're probably wondering, where are the comparisons? Well, I don't want to contrive any comparisons here. I don't have a £2,500–3,000 floor standing speaker to do a direct A-B comparison, and I'm not likely to anytime soon, given the fact that there's already a room in this house dedicated to storing hi-fi equipment that comes and goes from running this channel. But I have reviewed floor standing speakers before, so I can make some general comments. I reviewed the Triangle Genèse quartets that are a similar price and have a different tonal balance, but the overall sound quality I'd consider to be similar between the two speakers. The Ellipson Heritage XLS 15s are a little bit cheaper, around £1,800, with that retro design. I remember them being a little bit more resolving with a more neutral tonal balance. A floor standing version of my Proact Response 1 SCs would be more expensive than the Elac FS287s, so I wouldn't expect that to be a fair comparison in terms of sound quality, and the Elacs obviously don't quite get up to those levels of sonic excellence. The Elac Solano FS287s are what I'd consider suitable for a medium-sized room. That's something with a footprint of around 15 to 30 square meters, That's 160 to 320 square feet. They're a reasonable sized speaker that produce a decent amount of bass, so you need to get them away from walls, otherwise they start to sound a bit boomy. I had them well over a meter away from walls. The acoustic center of the tweeter and the first mid woofer is fairly close together. You can ignore the bottom woofer, which is dealing with low frequencies, and because the acoustic centers are quite close together, you can get relatively close to these speakers. I recommend a minimum distance of around 2 meters from the speakers. Ideally, you want the speakers a similar distance from each other so you can maintain that equilateral triangle. I had them slightly further apart so I could tow them in a little bit more aggressively and have the tweeters directly on axes. That way I could boost the high frequencies a little bit more. Think of it a bit like a treble control. I partnered the FS287s with a Hagel H95 amplifier, my own Hagel H160 amplifier, my Exposure 21 pre and 18 super monoblocks, the Wilsington R8 tube amplifier, and even a 7.8 watt single-ended triode tube amplifier that's in for review. All of those amplifiers, including that 7.8 watt tube amplifier, drove these speakers fine. Now these are a 4 ohm load with a minimum impedance of 3.5 ohms, but it just goes to show that modern amplifiers can cope with these kind of loads fine as long as there's nothing particularly unusual in the impedance plot, and I don't suspect there will be with these particular speakers. As far as overall tonal balance is concerned, well, it was the tonality of the speaker rather than the amplifiers that really shone through. That means that this speaker has a particular coloration. Now that isn't necessarily a bad thing. You might like the coloration of this speaker. What it also means is that this speaker is very forgiving of what amplification you use to drive it, and it's going to work with a wide range of different amplifiers. The Elac Solano FS287s are a speaker that are going to divide opinion. They clearly won't suit everybody. There's those of you who want the last word in tonal neutrality and detail retrieval. Well, you should be looking elsewhere. There's others who want a compact, elegant floor-standing speaker and have the space to accommodate them. It might be that you want a speaker that has a warm, rich tonal balance that you can listen to for ages without any listening fatigue. It could be that you have a home cinema system or just your TV connected to your hi-fi and you want a speaker that performs well in both duties. Well, this might be just the ticket. The Elac Solano FS287s get a recommended from this channel. Well, that's it for me for today. All that remains for me to say is if you like this video, please hit that like button, please share it. And if you haven't subscribed already and you like what I'm doing with this channel, please think about subscribing. And don't forget to check me out on Patreon, where I offer some consultancy services and some Patreon-only videos. But for today, for now, a British audiophile, signing off.